Welcome to Petronoia, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the energy debate. Hosted by Dan Romito, this show takes complex energy issues, strips away the agendas, and delivers clear fact-based insights. Whether you're an industry expert or simply looking for a balanced perspective, Petronoia brings clarity to the conversation. Each episode, Dan breaks down key topics, from U.S. energy independence to global policy impacts, focusing on the facts rather than the rhetoric, helping listeners make sense of the energy landscape. This is Petronoia, where we separate fact from fiction to fuel-informed discussions.
Welcome to Petronoia. I'm your host, Dan Romito. I am once again coming to you from off the road in the midst of travel. It's CERA week, so meeting with clients. I had the opportunity to connect with Mike Gehring. He is currently running point at the Energy Authority, and I'll let him break down his intro. But I saw this guy's presentation on natural gas and knew that he had to get on the podcast. So before we get into that, Mike, why don't you give a quick breakdown and introduction of what you're doing?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Dan. Hey, this is my first ever podcast. I've done.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, no shit. Okay, no pressure.
Yeah, you're popping my cherry. But this is very exciting because I do a ton of public speaking and I'm all over the world, the country doing stuff for conferences. And I do some videos for my clients, but man, I can edit them myself. When somebody else is editing them, I'm a little bit scared, right?
Yeah, we'll take it easy on you. I mean, for the maiden voyage, for the hazing, it won't be too bad, I promise.
All right, cool. Yeah, so I'm Director of Portfolio Management at the Energy Authority. And just real quick, we're a services provider in the power sector for utilities that are municipally owned. So think of states and cities that own their own utilities. We help them. They outsource like the expertise of the power markets because frankly, they can't afford to hire power market experts. So they hire us to do it for them. Mm-hmm. And my group helps with predicting where prices are headed on natural gas and power, and then executing and recommending their hedging to manage the risk.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, like I said, so we did a conference together in Ponte Vedra, and it turned out to be a great conference. Like the Power Summit did an amazing job, but I was not familiar with them, and the only reason, at least initially, I'm like, well, I live 15 minutes away from where they're hosting it, so what the hell? And some of the presentations. Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, I had one of my buddies on from Florida. Like, I want to make this a Florida strong podcast too, as well. And I was fascinated with your presentation. Like the last couple of ones I've gone to, I was a little bit, frankly, just bored. It's like, hey, guess what? We need more power. It's like, yeah, no shit.
Tell me a little more.
Right. Like, wow, earth shattering. But the one that the presentation that you did, particularly on natural gas, and then especially on long-term storage was fascinating. So why don't you, for the audience, break down the gist of that presentation and some of the findings that you were conveyed in it?
Yeah, so we've had this thesis for a while here at the Energy Authority that we're extremely bullish volatility for natural gas. And that's really comes down to a combination of the supply chain for gas being replacing the solid fuels, the coals of the world, which isn't a new story. But the real problem is you have the same amount of storage that we've had for the last 10 years. And really, we're going to grow storage. And this is underground cavern storage, maybe dribs and drabs here and there for the next 5 years. But we will have expanded our natural gas supply chain, meaning production and demand, by about 40% in that time frame. So you just think about everything is going through the natural gas system at a much faster rate of pace. If you think about like a chemical engineer in mass balance, what comes in has to come out. And if your bucket is the same size, then everything has to go in and out at the same velocity. And what that means is that you're going to have collisions that are way more catastrophic than you ever had before because you don't have the buffer in terms of storage. So I always equate it to like your residential planner, and you know you're going to have more congestion on the highways or the freeways. You have two options. One is you can increase the roads, expand that, or the other option is you could just increase the speed limit and let everybody drive faster. Well, the natural gas market, by happenstance, has decided to increase the speed limit. So when we have those collisions, they're going to be way more violent. And what that collision means is spot prices are going to move a lot more than they have before.
So do you think
that's like a layman's way of explaining it, but we could definitely dive in more detail.
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the main reasons one of the main reasons I moved to Florida and not Tennessee was when we were looking at Franklin, Tennessee. They were building like 5,000 homes. And I commented to the realtor, I'm like, aren't you guys going to make these 1-lane roads bigger? And they're like, well, the city never really got to that point. We're just building. It was like,
Right.
well, traffic here is going to be a complete bitch for the next 3 decades. Like, and obviously Florida has all the other amenities. So part of the reason was like, I'm out. But when you talk about the importance of storage, what's the state of storage today, right? I know you said that we're going into a world where we're just increasing the speed limit, but do we feel optimistic about where storage is headed, or are there a variety of problems that the general public should be aware of?
Yeah, to just build on that same metaphor, like there's no urban planners in natural gas markets, right? The urban planner is price.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of the day, if the value of storage increases, then we will build more storage. And the value of storage is dictated by the price in the summertime for gas relative to the price in the wintertime for gas. That is your key storage spread. And then the other piece of it, which is becoming more and more important, but it's very hard to build a business case on, is the volatility of prices in the spot or cash market. Because if you're going to contract for or build storage, you want to anchor it on the investment of, I know I can refill storage in the summertime and I'm going to deplete it in the wintertime and I can get that arbitrage. What I can't bank on is spot price volatility. But the more often that we see it, the more likely we are to actually invest, leach out old salt caverns, and build more storage. But the reality is we haven't had enough spot price volatility for people to make that leap of faith, for us to start that investment cycle and build and start to expand our storage.
When you say we, who's the we? Like, who's observing, who's taking note of the spot price volatility, and who would run point on saying, wow, like now's the time, gents?
Yeah. I mean, most of the storage plays today are owned and operated by big pipeline companies. Think Energy Transfer, Kinder Morgan, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they have some limited capabilities to expand their existing facilities. I know one in Mississippi is looking at, they've actually already put a pad on there that they thought they were going to leach out another cavern, and then they put it on hold, and now they're dusting it off again. But those brownfield expansions are almost few and far between. Then you start getting into greenfield expansions. And by the way, the storage facility needs to be a salt cavern, in my opinion, because it has to be able to get
why does it have? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So back up. There's 3 different types of storage. There's aquifers that are old water places to put water. There's old depleted oil and gas reservoirs, and there's salt caverns. The first 2 are very prevalent. But the last one is a geological formation that really only exists in the Gulf areas.
Okay.
So think Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi. So first, you're geologically limited on where you can do salt caverns. And the reason that they're so important is the problem that we have is meeting peak day deliverability for gas, especially in the wintertime. And you need to be able to flex, and a salt cavern can withdraw at a rate of 7 or 6 times that it can inject, because it builds up so much pressure that it can withdraw. It's all about pressure gradients. The aquifers and the reservoirs, while you can operate them at a decent pressure, nowhere near the amount you need to be able to help you on a peak day in wintertime. So you risk busting the reservoir if you try to pressure it up too much, and you lose your
Which I would imagine is a bad thing. You don't want to be busting reservoirs.
Very bad.
Is that bad? That's not good. It's not good.
Well, number one, you lose the product that you're trying to arbitrage value from, and number 2, you got a big environmental issue.
So taking it where we are at today, obviously you can't have a presentation or you can't have these discussions, particularly about natural gas, without mentioning the anticipated increase in power demand brought upon by the tech bros. How does the storage landscape, how is that impacted, or what needs to be done? Because eventually, the tech bros are going to figure out that this is a massive issue. They're the ones, assuming, or they're the ones presumably that are going to be sucking up the vast majority of future power demand. And that power demand, for all intents and purposes, is going to be dominated by natural gas. But you're telling us that there's this constraint for the time being with lack of quality storage. So how does that play out as it relates to the tech bro evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's really hyper-focused on pipelines, as they should be. I mean, the Marcellus is basically piped out, and we're producing about 36 billion cubic feet a day of the Marcellus. Permian is increasing maybe one pipe every 2 years. So Kinder Morgan is or Energy Transfer is doing the Hugh Brinson pipeline, which will come in line late 26. So they can theoretically grow. The real the real area of growth is the Haynesville in Louisiana and Texas. So, I think that from the perspective of what the natural gas market has been building for, it's even before the tech bro stuff. It's the LNG capacity that was brought about as a result of the Russia-Ukraine crisis and prices in TTF going to $100 per MMBtu, right? And the theory that structural arb was going to be there for quite some time, it justified people building in LNG liquefaction capabilities. And now, it looks like the LNG market might be rolling over relatively soon. So I think that the next big focus should be on storage, because while the pipeline does help in getting deliverability of the gas in the day, it doesn't help in the fact that we still get really, really cold, and we don't have a solution for that problem by way of batteries. Now that we're retiring coal will not be flexing up. It has to be gas that flex up, but you can't predict or rely on gas in the ground actually being able to make it to the end user if and indeed all this LNG plus power gen and then your peaky rescom demand is coming to fruition all at the same time in the wintertime. I mean, there is a solution where you prioritize the residents and the tech pros, the servers just turn down in those periods, but they have to be incentivized to do that or have the operational flexibility.
And that scenario isn't probably that likely, because in most cases, the tech bros, what they want, they're going to get, and that's probably going to come at the expense of the residents, right? Of the retail customers. So is that not a great assumption, or am I thinking about that wrong?
People respond to incentives, right? And so I just don't know about the data center power consumption profile. I know they run at very high load factors, but what happens if they have to go down for 24 hours? Is it the end of the world? I mean, we see it all the time with Bitcoin miners going down for price, and LNG will turn down for price when the ARB, or the difference in prices between TTF, which is the international LNG price, and Henry Hub collapses to within $2. They'll shut off. And so that is one way to solve the constraint and the problem. But in those times, meanwhile, like, the LNG ARB does not close by itself. It doesn't close by TTF coming down. It closes by natural gas coming up to it in those peak days, right? Because we don't have enough storage capacity. So and then it results in just a really, really whippier cash and thus futures market for natural gas for the foreseeable future.
So when we make the argument, and we've been saying this, and you saw some of the work that I've been working on, particularly at that conference. We're making this plea to upgrade the grid. We spend so much time on the generation aspect of energy. Many times that comes at the expense of discussing the state of the state as it relates to transmission and distribution. When we talk about the state of the grid, you are including storage as part of that story, or is that mutually exclusive, or how do we think about that?
I think it should be. You also have the problem too that storage facilities are competing with carbon capture and sequestration, right? You put them in the same underground facilities. Arguably, carbon capture doesn't need those salt domes, because it's really tracking if the carbon actually stays in the ground after you put it in the ground.
Is that a problem? It's like, hey, where'd this go? It's like putting money in the safe, like depositing your money at the bank, and then the bank being like, we might track it. Like, who the hell knows?
I mean, I put it in the ground, give me my tax credit. And
right.
I don't know if it's still in the ground.
With the change of administration, right, do you think that prioritization rebalances, or how do we think about it in terms of the administration priorities?
I think so. I think definitely he's laser focused on meeting the pipeline need. Now, I'm still a believe it when you see it, because until I see a pipeline developer go up into the Northeast, like, it would mean a lot to me if Energy Transfer announced tomorrow that they were going to go up into the Northeast and start the development on another Marcellus pipeline.
Would they get the regulatory green light to go do that? That sounds obviously really, really easy, but in terms of like permit reform and the regulatory environment, especially, let's just say, let's just call them out, Boston, which is like, we hate fossil fuels, yet we run on 40% coal, which
Yeah.
makes no goddamn sense. But anyway, like, I mean, so we're saying stuff that makes sense, but in actual, in real terms, in reality, is that a viable option right now?
I think that you can make a case that the regulatory door is wide open. Okay.
Right.
To go do whatever you want in this country and build whatever you want. Or at least it will be open by the time you're ready to spend the money, right? The problem that I still see is after you've gotten your certificates in hand from the FERC, you still have these NGOs out there that are working very closely with the District Court of Appeals and continue to gum up projects. I mean, we've seen Next Decade has had a construction permit granted and then vacated. And then you also saw a Transco had a construction permit, actually finished the upgrade work on their pipeline when the permit was vacated by the same district courts. So that to me is different than regulatory risk, right? Regulatory is, do you get your permit? You got another layer that has yet to be solved, in my opinion.
Yeah, you get the date with the hot girl, but then you still got to meet the dad, and the dad is basically right. Like that's the courts, right? That's good old Texas dad waiting to meet the new boyfriend. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Voted for Biden. I'm in trouble now.
I did not vote for Biden. Trust me.
No, it's the dad did, and then you're
exactly. Yeah. I mean, in Florida, I don't know that many people that would go that route. You know what's also interesting, and this is a timely conversation because I don't know if you saw this headline today. The announcement or the story that NextEra had in terms of gas can only meet a fraction of power demand. That is their quote. Now, once again, without sounding too cynical, NextEra is the #1 developer of wind and solar. So, I'm assuming that there's some ulterior motives in making that claim. But just
though.
Yeah, like
percent is still a fraction, right? I mean, like
right. We were having this conversation of like there's this argument going on in terms of like, well, how much power we're actually going to need, and what proportion can gas actually satisfy, and how does that actually imply? Like just to level set, right? You made an interesting comment in your presentation where you were making the argument, rightfully so, I think, but explaining this to the common person, I think that it's a little bit of a head scratcher. You specifically said, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's gas is not a base load, right? Gas is not a base load. Can you expand and explain that?
It can be a base load. So here's the problem.
So I got that quote wrong.
So it goes back to the whippiness of natural gas pricing as it will be in the and you have to remember, let's fundamentally back up and say, here's how the gas market operates. You refill storage all the way through the summer. If you are expected to run out of storage by October, each incremental molecule that you produce is absolutely worthless.
And what determines that? Just weather modeling? Like you look at the Farmer's Almanac and you're like, hey, we're going to run out. Like what the, or am I just oversimplifying that?
It's me and everybody else who trades gas that decides that we're going to run out of. No, I mean, I'm being a little bit cheeky, but like a lot of people are modeling storage of where we're going to be at the end of October. Your end of October number is the most important thing for if you're a gas trader. And if you anticipate that based on the current expectations of production and a normal summer and LNG just doing its thing, that you're going to be at 4.5 TCF of gas, well, that means something has to give. That's more storage capability than we have. We only have 4 TCF of gas storage capability.
4 TCF,
4 TCF. So if everybody's collective modeling says we've got way too much gas by the end of October, well, price has to crater in order to disincentivize production. So down to the cost of supply, call it $1.75 per MMBTU. Now on the flip side, when you are running tight on storage and you think that you're going to be well under that 4 TCF, you start looking ahead and saying, well, where might we be at the end of winter? And the winter stockout scenario is just as volatile, but on the upside, meaning we're going to run out of gas by the time we get to March, because that's when we drain all of our storage. And we drain it at a much faster pace than we inject it. So if the market thinks that there's any probability that we're going to be running out of gas by March, then we have to price up to layers of demand destruction. And the first layer is coal. So that's when coal steps in around $4, $4.50, about where we are now. And And then there's like literally no price levels in between coal and LNG. There's some industrial demand that could turn off, but there's like nothing
no
that
buffer.
anybody can point to say
Right.
that is going to solve the problem. And so you run from like 450, and if coal doesn't solve the problem, you've got to go all the way up to like $9 based on where LNG is trading for next week.
Yeah, and at the same time, I mean, in terms of like, not to completely nerd out, but elasticity of the market, it's not like the retail consumer has this running gauge on his thermostat, right? It's like, if it's cold, I'm turning on the goddamn heat. Like, I'm not going to, monitor how much is my bill. It's like it's paid in arrears, and then you're always surprised by that heat bill.
We've seen it time and time. You saw it in Uri, where LDCs are paying $1,000 per MMBTU for gas, because they have to. Now, if you went and called one of their customers and said, "Hey, are you willing to buy this $1,000 gas, or do you want to run your fireplace?" They'll go, "Run the fireplace, just turn off my power," right? But the LDCs don't think like that. They have to procure the gas, right?
Right. I mean, you brought it up too. I mean, the interesting thing about Uri, and we've been talking about this in a couple episodes. The post analysis that FERC did on Uri, in so many words, was, hey, we got out by the skin of our teeth because it warmed up on Christmas. What we should be doing is upgrading the infrastructure to make it very reliant on natural gas. But you are saying that you correct me if I'm wrong. You were saying in so many words that like that's correct, but one of the elements that they're probably underestimating and certainly not appreciating to the extent that they should is that we have a really big problem with storage. Like 4 TCF, like I'm almost positive that Texas is using 8 TCF on an annual basis. I think 4, or correct me wrong, provide me perspective wise, like 4 just sounds incredibly low.
It's about a 15% buffer on your total annual consumption, but it's not really the right way to look at it, right?
Okay.
And for many, many years, it's been fine. It's just the fact that we're adding so much indiscretionary load to the system by way of power gen demand for these tech bros.
What does that mean? What is indiscretionary? What does indiscretionary load? What do you mean by that? Sorry.
So if you think about it, like there's in the power demand stack, you've got a lot of people that are businesses that at some price it's not economic for them to make their widget, right?
Okay.
And then we also know that LNG will turn down at a certain price when the ARB is not there.
Mm-hmm.
But the residentials don't turn down at really any price.
Never,
right?
I'm doing this from my house.
Residentials, it's like the people making decisions on behalf of the residentials for gas. Right. They're buying it no matter what because they're afraid of grandma freezing to death.
Yeah.
And then
Mrs. Romito and Mrs. Gehring are not turning down the AC. That's not going to happen.
Then the question in my mind is like, where does the power demand, which then buoys gas demand for the tech bros, sit? Is it truly indiscretionary? Like, are they going to run those data centers 24/7 at any price? Or is there a level of switching where they say, I don't think I can really make an AI case work at this price, right? And the market is assuming that it's indiscretionary. And that's where I'm at for now. But I do think that we'll see a price where they change their behavior, and then it's like, oh, okay.
Do you think that price is relatively something extreme, or is it like where do you anticipate that landing? Like, I know it's a really hard question, but if you had your crystal ball.
No, but if I take a step back and I think about like, when was the last time gas prices were high? Gas prices were really high in 2022. They were around $9 in the summertime until the Freeport facility blew up. Did you hear anything about AI load growth then?
No.
NVIDIA's stock was...
I was still getting yelled at for not wearing a mask.
Yeah, NVIDIA's stock was trading at like $15. I mean, which would have been $150 because of the split and everything. But still, a tenth of where it is today. The entire load growth phenomenon happened in a time when gas prices have been basically below $3.50. And thus power prices have been really bad, right? So I don't know. It is very possible that if gas prices went up to $9 and all of a sudden all these tech bros who are in the middle of their capital cycle and they see that their power bills are coming in and their earnings are starting to fall.
Yeah.
Maybe that load growth totally dissipates, right?
Maybe they're
maybe,
just
maybe it needs $15 gas. I don't know, but
there's something to that too, because if you look at what they're doing, right? Amazon and Microsoft, Amazon in particular, well, I guess Microsoft too with 3 Mile Island, that joint venture, making the run at nuclear, it's much more. It's coming evident that it's much more of just like this future hedge. It's
an
as
insurance policy.
100%. Exactly. 100%.
I would love to see their contracts because I guarantee there's off ramps in that contracts that they are not talking about, and everybody's getting excited about the fact that they've inked them. But there's always conditions precedent, and there's always off ramps, especially if you're selling a stalled, nuclear facility that you literally have nothing else to do with. You're like,
right,
hey, you can have as many off ramps as you want. I'm not.
You're like, hey, cool nuclear facility, tech bro. Like, what are you going to do with it? I mean, it goes back to sort of like the complexity of the energy space. Bring it full circle. One of the other things that you said, and I don't know if this was, you're gonna have to clarify this. I don't know if this is your own estimation or this is sort of like the industry consensus. In the next 3 years, we'll be exporting, the United States, the proverbial we, will be exporting double the LNG.
Correct. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Double.
That's right. So we were about 12 BCF a day 2 years ago, and now 14 at the end of last year. And now we're up to 15 with Plaquemines LNG starting to ramp. And our projections will be at 27 to 28 by the end of 28. So
is that because of just what's going on in the EU, like the Russia-Ukraine thing, or is that just natural macro dynamics, or what's driving that?
Price, right. The great moderator of every investment is always price. And the fact that the LNG price went berserk during the Russia-Ukraine crisis allowed for all these plants to get funded and built. And remember, the European Union was scrambling to diversify away from Russian gas. So they were underpinning all of these investments. The developers aren't really taking much risk, to be honest with you. They're fully contracted out, with the exception of maybe Golden Pass, but that's a totally different animal. And then why is that a
different animal?
So I guess we'll take it back a trip down memory lane. Before I started at TEA, I worked for ExxonMobil. And so for the first 10 years of my career, I was trained that markets are efficient and that you don't need to hedge anything.
Idiot. I'm just kidding.
Well, then I started trading and getting into commodity trading around ships. This is my last 4 years of ExxonMobil. I was in shipping, and then LNG, and then I was in the crude business, and then finally natural gas and power trading. And I had to unlearn all those things. But from an investments perspective, and ExxonMobil still takes that approach in many of their investments. Like they just go for the lowest cost of supply, and then they believe that the market will be there and they have the balance sheet to do that. I totally respect their views, but they are one of the stewards, so is Qatar, and both of those entities are so cash flush that they don't need to underpin any LNG investment with long-term contracts. They're very happy to leave it open and start taking spot risk. I think they've signed a few deals, but by and large, I think that plant is uncontracted, and those volumes will meet the spot market LNG. So long-winded answer, but a little more context here.
Yeah, and so I mean, this is the thing. The European Union has regulations, at least in theory, that would constrain access to their particular markets, right? If as it is now, the books say that you need measurement, verification, quantification to export your LNG into the EU. For the most part, there's very little of that being done. I mean, Cheniere is leading the way, and Cheniere is Cheniere. But the other component, like that's juxtaposed with, hey, we want to be net zero. And it's like, well, which one do you want? Do you want affordable, reliable LNG, or do you want to be net zero? And it still seems to me, at least, that the EU wants both of those things, and you inherently cannot do that. You can go for the lowest carbon intense molecule, of course, and I think in part that's why some of the regulation is in place. But this notion, at least as an outsider looking in, I haven't been to Europe in about a year, so I don't know what the latest update on the ground is. But they seem still, Germany, France, even the UK, which I know is not in the EU, but I'm just lumping them in. This adamant, aspiration for net zero that comes in direct conflict with, hey, give us some LNG, give us some cheap LNG. Like, what are your feelings on that?
I think that the net zero,
or what budgets?
I think it's just used when it's convenient, right?
Yeah.
I think that they knew that they were in a short squeeze, right? When Russia's
they being the EU,
yeah, and they had no options, and so their only option was to start buying loads and loads of LNG, and they probably thought, you know what? Let's make sure this never happens to us again. Let's build our regas facilities. Let's contract with the United States projects, and let's make sure that we have plenty of LNG capacity so we never get squeezed from any one source again.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's as simple as that. If you weave in the carbon stuff to it, it's probably just political pandering. But I think it's as simple as
the net zero thing. Not to go off on a tangent, but it's so weird to me. Like it reminds me. So I was an idiot and caved into taking the kids to Disney last week. Right, we went a week early. We didn't get caught up in Disney. And it's like the whole Disney experience. So like the hotel and the fast pass and the food and all the bullshit. And it's like, okay. I mean, and to be fair, like they loved it. It was great. But occasionally, my middle son, who is a colossal smartass by trade, but nonetheless, like he's like, my feet hurt. Like we're walking too much. I'm like, are you joking? Like we're at Disney. We're doing all this cool crap. Like what you want to do. You're 11, by the way. Suck it up. Like, and you're complaining about your feet. I feel like that's analogous to like the net zero argument in many ways, because when everything's going great, it's like, oh my God, look at like everything's going wrong. I can't believe this. We should be going net zero. And then when shit actually hits the fan, you're like, reality sets in and you're like, all right, like where's the cheapest and the most reliable? And we'll just go that way. It's
the pendulum swings so fast, and you're absolutely right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, just like we are so pro LNG growth and development and capacity now at the moment. What I wonder is when gas prices do inevitably run up to $9-10, how pro LNG are we going to be when we realize that we are exporting? The Marcellus is the most prolific resource that we have in this country. We're exporting we're producing 36 billion cubic feet, and we're about to be exporting 26 of it. Not all molecules are coming from the Marcellus to other countries to achieve their carbon goals / lower their inflation targets, because our gas is cheaper than their alternative. Right? It's fascinating.
Do you think, so you said when, so not to put words in your mouth, do you think it's a function of not if, but rather than it's when prices hit $9? And
yeah.
Really? Okay. What scenario, like when does that happen? Not when, but what's the catalyst that drives that?
I mean, it could, in theory, if we get a warm summer, we're on a pace to have really, really tight storage by this winter. So if we get a warm-ish summer,
awesome.
And then at the end of the day, the 2 months that matter the most for the gas market is February and January.
Okay.
If those come in blistering cold, watch out. Absolutely watch out. We could easily eclipse $10.
How long does it take?
It's the great equalizer.
How long does it take to get a storage facility online? Like, is this like when we talk about nuclear, it's like, great, if we're lucky, that's 10 years, maybe. Like the storage, like what's the duration or what's the timing on getting storage online?
So the projects we were talking to at one point were 2030, 2029 at the earliest. And these were brownfield projects.
Brownfield being conversion from coal?
No, being an expansion of an existing facility.
Expansion of an existing facility. Okay.
So, they had their only problems were going through the permitting process. That was about 18 months, and then starting the spend, maybe another 6 months. So you're talking about 2 to 3 years of being at full capacity. I think they had volumes available in 27, so that would have been 3 years. So 3 to 4 years for a brownfield. A greenfield, where you're talking about building header pipes, environmental assessments. See, the beauty of a brownfield is usually if it's within the existing gate of a storage facility, they have very limited environmental impact survey work to do.
Yeah.
If it's a greenfield, I mean, then you're testing the whole thesis of how easy is it to build stuff in this country, right?
And it just gets held up most likely in lawsuits. Is that something like what are environmentalists? We will have some environmentalists on this show, and sometimes their perspective is so incredibly frustrating because it's so contradictory, right? They're for carbon credits, but not oil and gas buying carbon credits, which theoretically it should be the oil and gas space that's leading the way in buying carbon credits. They have these segments of environmental justice, which God bless them. There are issues there. I totally get it. But, it usually comes at the expense of economic expansion, or at least opportunities to expand economically. With all facets of energy, there's usually some gripe that an NGO will have. I'm not necessarily sure, like what's an environment, or the typical, like you can generalize, it's fine. What's a typical environmental NGO reaction or perspective on storage facilities?
You do have to go into the salt cavern and leach it out, and so you're going to have brine that you have to dispose of. So maybe you need to prove to somebody that you treat it the right way. The main problem is that they're going to be just like a FERC regulated pipeline. Because they're regulated by the FERC. It doesn't matter if they're sitting in one state. It doesn't have to straddle state boundaries. They're going through the FERC process, which just gives people way more opportunity to get in the way of it as compared to an intrastate pipeline, right? You can build them through Texas really fast. You can build them down south from Louisiana really, really fast.
Right.
But once you cross state lines and you're FERC regulated, then
once you have to go places where it gets really, 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 really cold, like that's the great irony. Like we don't like that stuff. Okay.
Right. So, I don't know if there's any, but it just goes to your point. There's cognitive dissonance around the environmentalist where you'll go and try to gum up an LNG export plant, which is clearly better for the climate if you believe it because LNG is displacing coal globally, right? That's what it does, right? So why would you get in the way of that process? I don't know. Maybe
the other,
because the lawyers want to earn a buck. I don't know.
Look, it's a whole other conversation. I'm at the conclusion that the vast majority of environmentalists and environmental NGOs don't really care about the environment, right? They've gotten a taste of political power. Yeah, they've gotten a taste of political power. They understand the influence and the fun that it is for fundraising, and that's their focus. Conversation, we'll do. I do want to do. I got to get the approval from the
producer. Can't wait to listen to it.
I want to do like a shot every time, like we do like the what is it, the 100 sips of beer every minute, whatever it is, or you drink every time an environmental NGO says something, like a live streaming of that. Anyway, we digress.
There's one thing that you asked earlier that I didn't answer, and
I
want to go back to it. You said, why isn't gas baseload? And it absolutely, I was building that whole scenario where we've got the two different prices. And the fact is, like, it is baseload, but the problem is the fuel source is going to be so volatile in pricing that it will price you out of baseload in the future. So think about coal on the ground. That stuff is the same price. I mean, power basin has been like 80 cents an MMBTU forever.
Right. Since we've been alive.
The only time coal actually ramps in price is either there's a fire in the mines or the rails have trouble, and then the coal gets scarce and it starts increasing in price. But the actual supply chain is much more resilient. Natural gas is flowing at 70 miles an hour, and so every 2 days a molecule that's produced in Permian is coming into Houston and then being burned. It's just way tighter of a supply chain, so you're going to have way more volatile pricing. And so a base load CCGT that has like a 6.5 heat rate, it's meant to price base load, but when gas gets tight and it's $90 in MMBTU, are you still happy with that base load result? Right? Your power price is $1,500. So
go on. Sorry.
No, that's it. That's the
Yeah,
the
but
problem.
that brings up a good point. Like, and I was about to ask that, but it's good context. Related to price, you had also made a comment about the quote unquote pickle that the Trump administration is as it relates predominantly to oil prices, but I'm sure that it's applicable to the remainder of let's call it the fossil fuel spectrum. But maybe elaborate on like what's the pickle? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah. So I think Trump, I think there's no surprise that everybody thinks Trump is trying to get oil prices down as part of his political agenda. I think he
Mhm.
sees that as a main linchpin to economic prosperity. He sees it for his inflation goals. It's one of the reasons he's pounding the table that if Saudi increased production, that they would, that the Russia-Ukraine war would be over. So he's sort of using that as a way to get them. And they've responded. They've increased production. They
Yeah.
said they will by 200 kbd. Now, the problem is at some price, and it's not that far away, it's maybe
Mhm.
$40, $45, the Permian will roll over in its production. And when it
Mhm.
rolls over, it will roll over with the associated gas that comes from the Permian too.
Mhm.
And that's a big problem because we expect as a natural gas market for those molecules to be coming forever.
Right, in perpetuity.
In perpetuity. So the minute you eclipse and start to come down on off that arc, which would be price driven,
Mhm.
natural gas prices will go berserk on the upside.
So this is my theory too, and once again, I feel like in many ways I always use this saying, but in this conversation in particular, we're telling the audience essentially that there's no Santa Claus.
There
Um,
isn't. Yeah.
yeah. I don't think Trump, and I don't think anybody. I don't think God could come down, Jesus Christ can come down and change the trajectory of prices. I don't think that is a solvable problem. You can sort of make
I don't know.
um,
You can
well,
multiply
you
the
can.
fish, right?
I
Multiply the
mean, look,
fish.
I do like. I mean, I do like the strategy. It's like lower regulation to get output through the roof. Hopefully, that can generate enough incremental value to pay down debt and to generate more wealth that offsets the increase in price. Like I fully agree with that. Right. I do this presentation where I'm like, guys, like I'm on Trump's side on this, but the fact of the matter, at least in my opinion, is he is not going to get control of pricing and inflation to the extent that people expected him, which were unrealistic expectations and unfair in many ways to begin with. Like that's another point. But because of that, I think that will impact him in the upcoming primaries in 18 months. And historically speaking, we've had guests on the past where they're like, hey, it's pretty common that the party in power loses seats in the primary, but there's a higher degree of likelihood that if he can't get pricing under control to the extent that he promised, which the odds of that happening are fairly low, then you do run into a scenario where you have an up and comer in the Democratic Party, and who the hell knows who that is because the Democratic Party is in complete disarray. And I don't think anyone abides by the AOC School of Management or the Nancy Pelosi School of Day Trading. Like, I don't think anyone's attending those grad school classes anymore.
I would go
But
to Pelosi's School of Day Trading.
I would absolutely go to
I
Pelosi
would go
School
to
of
that.
Day Trading. Yeah, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. I'd be sitting in a beach somewhere. I'd be sitting in Ponte Vedra Beach. But anyway, so the increased probability of a Democrat reclaiming at least the presidency and the Senate, I think are higher than what people think. And if that happens, a lot of the stuff that was on the table during the Biden administration, not all of it, but a significant portion, will probably come back onto the table, which will only increase regulatory burden, which will only increase price. So this window of opportunity to get it right, I think, in many ways, is not necessarily only contingent upon like, hey, let's build all this stuff out. Like we need to do that anyway. I think there's a higher probability that, unfortunately, a Biden or Kamala Harris or any adjacent political regime can potentially regain power, and then we're in a really big crunch, right? We're in a really big crunch. That's my theory, and once again, I hope to God that that doesn't happen, and I want to be proven wrong. But when I bring that up, people either want to punch me in the face or they're just putting their heads in their hands and are like, I hate my life. like what the hell? I don't know. Like, do you have a thought on that?
I mean, I only really can speak to commodity markets. I'm not nearly as politically savvy as you, but I do think that, if he can lean on Saudi and they can increase production and the price of oil comes down even more, and I think it will, I think he'll continue to do that stuff, then inflation will follow. Now, the gas phenomenon that I'm talking about probably doesn't manifest itself into inflation until the second half of his term because of the way power prices are passed on to constituents. You have to remember, like, when oil comes down by $10, everybody enjoys that on their very next tank that they fill up. Oil prices and gasoline prices are in lockstep. But power prices, they may go berserk, and it will take the utility, because they value rate stability, 6 to 12 months to actually pass that on to you and I in terms of increased rates for most utilities. So I think he's got a big buffer in terms of not worrying about if gas prices run, and which is why he's probably focusing on oil first.
And this notion of energy independence and the U.S. becoming the epicenter of global energy production, like, I buy into it. I think it makes perfect sense. It sounds very much like you're a proponent of it.
I'm a proponent of being capable of energy independence. Capable is different.
Yeah, explain that one.
Energy independent. Like, if I can meet the needs of myself, but I choose to buy oil from Saudi because it's cheaper, or Venezuela because it's cheaper, I'm helping my community, my people, optimize. And then if the shock, inevitably geopolitical shock, happens, then I have that capability. So that capability comes in the form of drilling rigs just available. They don't have to be running. Pipelines in the ground, refineries in operation, and then oil and gas, or gas infrastructure too. So I think capability is the reason Europe got in such a big pickle. Is they're sitting on this giant gas field called Groningen in the Netherlands, and they had mothballed it many, many years back. And
is that the engineering term? They mothballed it?
Well, I would love to see an analysis of, for the amount of money that they spent buying $100 in MMBTU gas when everything went berserk, how much could they have paid the people who were upset about the earthquakes in Groningen to relocate into sweet places in Switzerland, right?
Right.
Like, you could have literally given them so much money to relocate that small town into.
Right. The royalties on this thing are going to be so immense that we're just going to move you guys, right? And we're going to move you out of, like, for all intents and purposes, this crappy town into some 5-star equivalent resort. Okay.
But they couldn't, so they didn't have the capability to diversify, which is why prices went berserk. Yeah. I'm a big proponent of having the capability, but continue drinking someone else's milkshake as long as it's cheaper for as long as you want.
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant entrepreneurial mindset. It's right. Why would I use my own money when I can use someone else's, right? And we both get rewarded in the process. And I do like this aspect. I mean, you bring up Venezuela. I mean, I would probably push back slightly on that. I know you'd be just using an example, but I do like the idea of, like, here is this carrot, and you get it if you abide and align with what we're trying to accomplish. I don't think, and we saw this in the prior regime, I don't think the stick is that effective of a tool that grants geopolitical stability. It certainly doesn't establish socioeconomic prosperity, right? You can't tax your way into prosperity. You can't regulate yourself into a solution. We've seen that in every single case. Literally, it's the free market and the entrepreneur that's come up with solutions to do it, not just necessarily the best, but the cheapest as well. Like, for the life of me, I don't know why that was lost on the prior regime. And hopefully Trump facilitates, and I think he has, right, but facilitates this environment where it's like, I want to get the smartest problem solvers on the planet in a room to get this done. You know, the holdup that I see is the energy story in its entirety, right, in aggregate, is so misunderstood is not even the right word, just not understood. Right, to your point on storage
too, right? There's so many different facets. You've got you've got butterflies that are creating a tsunami at almost every turn. Right?
And then the regional component too. Like I've had people in the Northeast be like, yeah, well, like it's the grid. I'm like, there's like 7 different grids, man. Like, or people in Colorado, they're like, we'll just build a pipeline from Colorado to Texas. I'm like, okay, you do that, buddy. Like, let's see how that goes for you. I do want to get in the next 5-10 minutes. I do love playing this game. It's the over under.
Awesome.
I'm actually really enthusiastic to hear what your answers are going to be. So over under natural gas as a percent of the U.S. energy mix in 2030, 60%.
Over the course of the year. So this is just smack dab averaging over the course of the year. I'm going to actually go under.
You're going to go under?
Yeah.
Son of a bitch. Everyone says under.
I think there's a movement that has not yet happened, but is building momentum around not letting coal retirements happen.
Okay. How about nuclear as a percentage of the U.S. energy mix in 2030? 35%.
It'll be exactly what it is today, probably less a little bit than any factoring in any increases in load growth because the denominator gets bigger.
Interesting. Okay. Love it. You're going to hate this question, but I'm doing it half to be a smart ass, but half because I'm just curious. Wind as a percent of the U.S. energy mix in 2030, 10%.
Higher.
You think it's okay? Wow, I'm shocked by that. Everyone, for the most part, says lower. Okay.
I see a repowering momentum for the wind units, and when they repower, they'll have better efficiency.
Okay. The amount that the government will spend on infrastructure over the next 18 months, $500 billion. Over? What do you think? Yeah. I mean, what number do you have in mind?
I just look at it as it will be spent in some way. Now, it could be spent through tax incentives, right? Or it could be spent in regulatory incentives. I'm not really sure exactly how, but infrastructure, it's got to get built. It's definitely a focus, and $500 billion isn't a whole lot when you look at it in the context of energy-related infrastructure.
I just can't believe. I mean, it's something as simple as a tangible example, right? The power lines in Texas are 40 years old. Yeah. It's like it's egregious in my opinion. Anyway, conversation from the other day. What percentage of the S&P 500 does the energy sector make up in 2030? 6.5%.
Under, just because I'm bearish crude. I think crude's going to be a dog for a while, and there's too much Saudi capacity, right? That capacity is going to keep a lid on crude prices, and still at the end of the day, crude prices drives energy names in the stock market.
Yeah. Okay. And then finally, the amount of natural gas in TCF the United States will consume for electricity in 2030. 20 TCF
over. Yeah.
Over?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think the number is close to?
Well, I mean, we're producing 100 BCF a day right now. Times 365. What is that? 36 TCF right now. So it's got to be over that.
Okay. Interesting.
Am I doing that math?
All right. I think you are. Yeah. I mean, so for example, I mean, we've done this analysis. The amount of the anticipated demand that Texas is going to consume natural gas wise for electricity is like 12 to 15, right? That sort of is the consensus. Now I say 20 because I've spoken to people and they're like, there's no way that's even close to that. And then I've had people come in at like 50 or 60. And so I'm trying to establish like what the common is. I think most people say like 30, but I go 20 to make it easy on people. Well, any parting thoughts, man? Like once again, we covered a lot of ground, but if you had to give like the three takeaways, like what would you summarize them as?
Gas markets are going to be volatile in pricing, and that's going to result in very volatile power pricing. And as we get more heavily dependent on natural gas markets,
Mm-hmm.
that is going to cause just a more volatile pricing structure for everybody who consumes electricity.
Yeah.
And so that needs to be readily apparent. One of the ways to mitigate that is by increasing our storage footprint in the U.S.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like that's going to be, it hasn't been put into an attention, I guess, if you will, by regulatory agencies just yet, or even proponents of projects.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is just, remember prices are always dependent. They're price path dependent. So, a high oil and gas prices is not necessarily good for the economy. I think that there's a lot of things that we can do to keep prices down, which is generally better for the economy and the consumer.
Yeah. Mike, we're going to have to do a follow-up, man. This is great.
Cool.
I really appreciate the time. I know everyone's going to learn a lot. And so can't thank you enough, my friend.
Thanks, Dan. Glad you popped my cherry for the podcast.
That's right. Maiden voyage. All right, we'll talk soon.